Welcome into another episode of Tailgate Talk SEC. I am Will Thomas, and today I wanted to go through some chaos scenarios in the SEC for 2026. Now, obviously, we all know how we each individually think the season is going to play out in the SEC, and there's obviously, just a broad strokes consensus of what the SEC might look like this year. But what if that didn't happen, right? What if we had a couple of teams absolutely jailbreak that idea and we had some utter chaos, maybe not even that far into the season? Now, before we get into it, I've got 5 chaos scenarios this morning for you guys. Before we get into that, if you have been enjoying all of my college football content and you want even more as the season starts to press on, we're only 2 weeks away from kickoff. Follow me on Twitter at WillThomasCFB. Subscribe here at Tailgate Talk SEC and everywhere else. I'll be doing this every single day, and I just love doing it. So every single follow, like, share, all of that just helps me out so much. But let's get right into this right now. My first chaos scenario. I actually tweeted this out last night, so if you follow me on Twitter, you have already seen this one. But what if the Florida Gators start 6-0? So what are their biggest questions, right? Before we get into it, what are the biggest hurdles that will be stopping Florida from going 6-0? Because here's real quick, just their schedule for the first 6 games: FAU, Campbell, at Auburn, Ole Miss, at Missouri, South Carolina. So for starters, which one of those games can't they win? Right, there's not one of those games that are just in an unwinnable spot for them. The hardest game is home against Ole Miss, but that is Ole Miss coming off the game against LSU. So win or lose for Ole Miss, that's an emotional letdown, and they have to go to Gainesville. That's a tricky spot. So none of those 6 games, you can really even tell me that Florida's going to be more than a 6-point underdog in. They're all going to be that tight. Their biggest questions for the Gators: quarterback, right? I mean, who's it going to be? And offensive line, really. Since the spring, Summerall's told us that, like, physically and emotionally, right, the offensive line has really grown. They've gotten way stronger. That was their biggest weak point in the spring, was literally just physically. They just weren't ready to be an offensive line in the SEC. But they worked through it. They got bigger. They got stronger. And it just seems like they have a more cohesive idea of what their starting 5 is going to be. Now, it's not totally set yet, but they're much closer there. In terms of the quarterbacks, right, whether it is Aaron Philo or Tramel Jones, I think Tramel Jones has the higher overall ceiling, but Aaron Philo's floor is up there because he is used to Buster Faulkner, their offensive coordinator. But regardless, especially early in the year, all that's going to be asked of the Florida quarterback is going to be make the right decisions and just lean on your elite skill players. Right, the receiver room for Florida is disgusting. The running back room, led by Jaden Ball, is nasty. The quarterback for Florida, whoever it is, really all year, is not going to have to do that much. Right, they just need to make the right decisions, the right reads, and execute the offense correctly. So if that's all the quarterback has to do, and we have reports that the O-line is much better, and that defense is what we already know that it is, this Florida team is full of talent. And you look at those first 2 games, obviously wins. I guess FAU and Campbell. On the road at Auburn, it's a lot of new for both sides. Auburn's first scrimmage was yesterday, I believe. They had some procedural issues, so they're not quite there yet, but they still have 3 weeks. Florida's is today, as I'm recording this. We'll know about it on Monday, so we can kind of get a sense for where both teams are at. But that game's a bit of a toss-up. Right, that should be real close to a pick 'em right now. The home game against Ole Miss, I just think, is the trap spot of all trap spots. I like Florida in that situation. At Missouri, very dependent on if Ahmad Hardy is back at this point for the Tigers. And home against Carolina, even if the Gamecocks do have the better quarterback in this game, I think Florida's talent will, most of the time win them that game. So if they do go 6-0, the Gators start off the year, what are they ranked when they go into Austin to play Texas? I mean, they're probably top 10. They might even be higher. And then you get to that point in Florida's schedule where they can lose to Texas and lose to Georgia. Those are in back-to-back games. Texas, bye week, Georgia. Then their largest hurdle to make the playoff at that point is a home game against Oklahoma, which is, again, similar to that Ole Miss game, just incredibly winnable being in Gainesville. So if Florida's able to start 6-0 with an offense that clicks, with really some good runway in their schedule, they could easily be, one of the top 4 or 5 maybe playoff favorites at that point in the year in the SEC, and it'll be at the expense of somebody else, in a world likely Ole Miss if they beat them. And then Florida can throw an entire wrench into the projections of the SEC. The next one is also a very optimistic one. What if Mississippi State starts 5-0? Here are their first 5 games: Louisiana Monroe at home, at Minnesota, really intriguing game, and at South Carolina. Then they host Missouri and they host Alabama. Here's the case for why it's, in the realm of possibility, right? Kamario Taylor is a game breaker at quarterback. He is, right? Even if he's very raw, he has that ability to be the best player on the football field. So is Fluff Bothwell at running back. So is Anthony Evans at receiver. He is a lightning bolt getting downfield. So what if this offense clicks very early on? right? You have all those individual playmakers that are able to just explode, and they're able to score like 35 points a game. Then you look at this Mississippi State defense, where the secondary is a known commodity, right? Kelly Jones at corner is awesome. Isaac Smith at safety is awesome. So I think that at a baseline level, Mississippi State is always going to be able to keep the lid on opposing offenses. So if you have that paired with an offense that can score 35 points a game, and then maybe you get Will Whitson, he's back, but is he totally fully healthy off his injury last year? Can he be a great player off the edge? Right? Can someone in the front seven step up? If you're able to score a ton of points and keep a lid on opposing offenses to where they at least can't, go shot for shot with you and they have to earn their drives, you can be in most games. Right? So their hardest game here is probably hosting Alabama in these first five in week 5. But at that point, you're in week 5. State will be more comfortable with what they're doing. So will Alabama, right? Because they're also breaking in a new quarterback, whether it is Keelan Russell or Austin Mack, likely Keelan Russell. But it's the same thing where really none of these games for State are, in theory, unwinnable. And the reason why I say that, even though you got Bama on that schedule, is because last year, right, they went 5-7 and they lost their bowl game against Wake Forest. They were 3 plays away from 8-4. Go back to their game against Florida on the road. They were in field goal range before Florida's D tackle Mekhi Boyro dropped back and picked off a pass. That was almost impossible. They were up by 17 on Texas in the fourth quarter. Right, you get one more first down, you break up one more pass, you win that game. They went to overtime against Tennessee. Right, all it takes is one play there to win that game. They were way closer to being very good last year than most people think because of their win-loss record. So this State team, if you're giving me as a baseline coming into the year, they're not as far back as everyone thinks they are. They have game breakers on offense and on defense in that secondary. And you have a schedule where, at Minnesota is tricky, but, can they just go out there and can you have better athletes than the Golden Gophers, which I believe they do have. At South Carolina is also tricky, but what if Lenore Sellers isn't totally comfortable yet? It's a lot of what if, but it's very possible. So for State, I think if they go 5-0 to start the year, all of a sudden you're looking at them as a ranked team. And then, other games on their schedule, they get Vandy, they get Auburn at home, they have another bunny against Tennessee Tech. Those, if you start 5-0, those 3 games alone are 8-0. You also host Oklahoma. You have the Egg Bowl at the end of the year. You go to LSU. There's a lot of wins on this Mississippi State schedule if we're at a point where they're 5-0. So the Bulldogs can be very sneaky this year if they get off to a hot start. Third one here. Carolina Gamecocks. What if Lenore Sellers is all the way back? How much chaos can he cause? I mean, game by game, we know what Lenore Sellers can do. Right? I mean, he's the best athlete on the field. If it's not him, it's his receiver, Nick Harbor, or Dylan Stewart. We know what he can do game by game. And just looking at the Gamecocks' schedule this year, I mean, with him under center, they're going to have the quarterback edge in almost every single game. Right? I mean, the ones you can point to, against Georgia, probably take Gunner over him. But then, Oklahoma, John Mateer, A&M, Marcel Reed. Are we really comfortable saying we want Mateer or Marcel Reed over the North Stars in the vacuum? I don't know that we are. So I think you go into 11 of 12 South Carolina games saying they have the edge at quarterback. That's a very good place to start. Then looking at the rest of their offense, I have some questions about their running backs, but if Lenore Sellers can almost operate as, 70% of a running back in terms of production, that problem goes away a good bit. At receiver, you bring back Nick Harbor. You also portal in Nitro Tuggle and Jaden Gibson. That passing offense should be better. And then defensively, you have Dylan Stewart back. And this year, like his freshman year, he has help. Caleb Herring is on the other edge. They portaled him in from Tennessee. And Dylan Stewart is healthy now after playing with a really bad back injury last year. At linebacker, can Justin Okoronkwo just be stable, be even stronger? Can Vakari Swain be another game breaker in the return game? The individual pieces on South Carolina can support Lenore Sellers if he is absolutely locked in and he plays a Heisman-esque caliber season, which I think we can all agree he has in him. The question is just, is that potential going to be unlocked? Right, because in 2024, when in Sellers' first year as a starter, they went 9-3. They almost made the playoff. So they can reach those heights again if things click. Right, going through the schedule, their first 3 games, Kent State, Towson, Mississippi State. That week 3 game, right, Carolina versus Mississippi State, that's going to go a long way in determining which one of these chaos scenarios might play out. You have to go to Alabama in week 4, but Carolina's almost beat Alabama the last 2 years. You host Kentucky, you go to Gainesville. Home games against Tennessee, A&M, Georgia. Road games against Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Clemson. It's a bunch of hard games, obviously, but with the individual talent and knowing that Carolina probably has the best quarterback in almost all those games, it's hard to look at many of them and say, yeah, they're just not winning that. Because you can't do that. You just can't do that with a team as dangerous as Carolina, with athletes as good as they have, and a quarterback as good as they have. So if Sellers comes all the way back, if they go 9-3 again, maybe they cross that bridge and go 10-2. We'll see during the year who that comes at the expense of, whether it's Alabama, maybe Oklahoma or A&M, who they take down. And then B, you could get the Gamecocks maybe making the playoff. This schedule is where if it's the right 9-3, they can at least be in that conversation to maybe make the playoff. But if Lenore Sellers is all the way back to what he was in 2024, right, and that Heisman potential that, I'm one of these people who thought we saw in him at the beginning of last year, Carolina can make a lot of noise and pull off a ton of upsets. This next one here is really my only pessimistic one. And it's about two teams. What if LSU or Ole Miss start 1-3 to begin the season? All right, these are two teams who have playoff aspirations. You could really argue national championship aspirations for both of them. Let's start with LSU. All right, so they open with Clemson, Louisiana Tech, at Ole Miss, and A&M. Right, so these teams play each other, so they're not going to both go 1-3. But one of them could, I think. And so there's the LSU breakdown, right? That opening game against Clemson is being written in as a win way too easily. Right, that the big game lines that came out during the summer, LSU was like -11.5, -12. That number's sub 10 now. Right, because Clemson, their defense is going to be solid. Their receiver room was one of the best in the country going into an LSU secondary that has some depth questions. I think it could be a low-scoring game like it was last year when these two teams played, and low-scoring games have a very high range of variability. So that game is not a win by any means in the preseason here. At Ole Miss, we know how hard that's going to be, right, with the emotion that the Rebels are going to be playing with. And then you get to host A&M. It's an entirely different LSU team, but A&M went into Baton Rouge and whooped them last year. Marcel Reed is still there. That defense is replacing some stars, but they're replacing them with really good players. All three of those games for LSU are losable, especially if Sam Leavitt, after missing the spring, isn't totally ready to run that offense effectively. Right? If that secondary does start to get its depth tested, does the thinness in their back end come back to bite them? And if we get to that point where LSU opens up 1-3 and 0-2 in conference play with a loss against Clemson, can you imagine the noise around Lane Kiffin? I mean, because of all the noise that he created, right, during that coaching search, leaving Ole Miss for LSU, all the money that's been put into that roster, that would be an unbelievable run on social media. The discourse would be crazy. It'd be incredibly toxic. And there would be so much pressure on Lane to, at that point, go 8-0 to end the year and salvage the season. Now, for Ole Miss, their first four games, they play Louisville in Nashville, they get Charlotte, they host LSU, and they go to Florida. Now, I have a hard time predicting them over Florida at any point, right, just because of that spot. I think the Gators are able to pull that upset. This opening game against Louisville, it's hard, right, because we're at a point where, Jeff Brom over Pete Golding, as head coaches, you just have to give the edge to Brom because he's done it. And what's weird, I don't believe that the Ole Miss players are really doing this. I think they are to a degree, but, the Ole Miss official account was tweeting out giveaways for the LSU game. But not just as a countdown, almost like that's the beginning of their season. You can't do that when you play a power opponent that has one of the best running backs in the country in Isaac Brown in week 1. Louisville can absolutely sneak up and bite Ole Miss in the beginning of the year with, all the turnover that Ole Miss has on their staff, right? We don't really know what that offense totally looks like this year. Louisville can absolutely catch Ole Miss. So then, so can LSU. And they can absolutely drop that game in Gainesville against the Gators. If Ole Miss starts 1-3, Pete Golding is going to be ripped to shreds. It's going to be that he can't, he can't be a head coach, right? That Ole Miss made a mistake by just promoting from within, trying to rally the guys by just grabbing their D coordinator who wouldn't go with Lane. It's going to look like an oversight, right? They could have gone on an actual coaching search, but they didn't. There will be a lot of critique on their administration. And there'll be a lot of talk about how, Trinidad Chambliss and Kejuan Lacey, we'd have to see if they do go 1-3, what that 1-3 looks like, because it can look a lot of different ways. But it's either, Chambliss, just caught lightning in the bottle last year, but he, now that defenses have adjusted, he's just not quite that good. Or, Kejuan Lacey, he was, he profited from the Lane Kiffin Charlie Weiss system. Those are the narratives that we're going to have to deal with if Ole Miss does go 1-3. Now, none of those narratives are really constructive. And I'm not sure how many of them are that true. Because I do believe that Pete Golding can be a good coach. I know what Chambliss and Lacey are. But these first 4 games, right, man, if those 3 teams just catch you, you can go 1-3, and it's almost barely even your fault. So LSU and Ole Miss, they open with a hard enough 4 games where there is a scenario out there where one of them starts off 1-3, and we get a lot of crazy discourse to begin the year. Now, the last one I've got here, the last chaos scenario. What if Tennessee clicks ahead of schedule? I'm of the opinion that the Vols this season are kind of in a year before the year thing, right? Where you look at their roster for 2026, there's tons of talent, but I look towards 2027 and what that roster might look like next year, and I get really excited about it. Now, I had this written down 2 days ago, this chaos scenario. We've had 2 season-ending Vol injuries on defense since then. So that gets way harder, right? Edris Farouk was a massive loss at safety. You lost some guys at linebacker. But this offense could still be really, really good. Obviously, what if Faison Brandon doesn't miss a step? Sorry, what if he doesn't need to develop like a true freshman normally does? He comes in as one of the top 5 players in the country. He's already looks so physically ready. What if he's already a lightning bolt? Right? We know what Deshaun Bishop can be as a lead runner. We know how good those receivers are. We know how big and strong the offensive line is. And Jim Knowles and his defense, the book on him, and partly why I'm more 2027 for Tennessee, is that it takes a year or 2 to really get his scheme in place. I feel I'm even more worried about that because Chaz Coleman left, and now you have some more injuries on guys you were going to rely on. But if this offense for Tennessee can be just lightning punch after lightning punch, that's not an expression, but just punch after punch, lightning bolt after lightning bolt, the defense doesn't even need to be that good. It just needs to be better than it was last year, which was abysmal. And I do believe that Jim Knowles brings a standard of this defense is not going to be horrible. Right? If Tennessee's able to score 38 points a game, which they have the personnel to do if it clicks, Jim Knowles' defense will be able to handle that. So really it comes down to a Josh Heupel offense being efficient and explosive. If that's the biggest question for the Vols, you feel really good about it. But the win total is what it is for a reason, right? I still think it's more unlikely than not that we do see Tennessee click this fast this year. But if they do, right, they get 3 pretty light games to start. Week 2 at Georgia Tech, though, is not that light. It's easier than most of their conference games, but missing your defenders, that game gets tricky. Their conference opener is home against Texas. That place is going to be an unbelievable atmosphere. If they pick off Texas there to go 4-0, we're going to have some Tennessee conversations. Then they play Auburn at home, at Arkansas, 2 games where they are the more talented team. They host Alabama. Bama's had an impossible time in Neyland. Then they go to South Carolina. 8-0 to start the year, and we're having some major playoff conversations about the Vols. Because if they're able to catch that lightning in a bottle, where their hardest games, so in the first 8, are home against Texas and home against Bama, we know what Neyland can do. If you're an 8-0 Tennessee team heading into your bye, with your Final Four being Kentucky, at A&M, LSU, and at Vandy, you better make the playoff. You better go to Atlanta. So if this Tennessee team's able to click ahead of schedule, mainly on offense, and you see Faison Brandon really light it up, they can cause so much chaos and almost be a surefire playoff team and make a push at the SEC championship game. So those are all 5. I just wanted to also make it clear right now. I was trying to sell each scenario. I don't think any of these scenarios can actually happen. I don't believe that they will actually happen. But they're possible, and college football is so unpredictable that really no scenario can be just totally dismissed immediately because we never know what's going to happen in any given season. So just some chaos scenarios there to try and run your brains here 2 weeks out from the college football season. But that'll do it for this episode. If you haven't already, please subscribe here if you did enjoy this video, you've been enjoying this content, and follow me on Twitter. I'll be doing this every single day. I have been Will Thomas, and I will see you next time.